So, welcome back, everybody, to the Payments Leader Show. This is part two of my conversation with Srini. Srini, hi, welcome back.
Hi, Adrian. Good to be back.
Pleasure, welcome back. And of course, everybody knows that from our audience that what we're about is trying to raise all boats across the RE ecosystem to reduce friction in both business to business as well as business to consumer, but taking a human-centric approach to the tasks and the difficulties, but then seeing the opportunity in everything before we start embracing and looking at the challenges that are going to be on the way. So please go back to part one of this, where we talked about Srini's leadership style and also his personal brand, how he's taken from feedback about being a belligerent optimist to actually that becoming his superpower, and him taking that to any project or any room he's in. He brings that energy to that room and to that conversation. What I'd like to do now is perhaps dive in a little bit more about the actual opportunities within the industry. So my first question is, obviously, you've worked on multiple different areas across the tech industry and particularly across fintech as well. Which one of the many opportunities that you've seen, what most excites you out of all the potential opportunities within the payments industry that can have the greatest impact in your experience?
I think, Adrian, we are in an extremely interesting time. People were in the open banking industry, which is where I am right now. The fact that open banking is now graduating to open finance and then probably into open data. That was already very fascinating to me, right? The complexity of, different banks, the way they share data, and how consumers are, wanting that data back for the services that they want is already pretty complex by itself, right? And then you actually add in this notion of, oh, there is this consumer who has an identity, and that identity needs to be very secure, safe, um, because there is so much fraud. Because open banking is now, and open finance is democratizing the access to that data, right? And then comes, AI from the left-hand side, with the ability for agents to make payments, ability for agents to have certain, decision-making authority provided to them by that individual or that consumer or that identity, right? So you have this confluence of these three different things coming together. You have AI, you have open finance, which is democratizing that data, all the financial data, and then you have this identity piece in there as well, right? So we are living in that interesting time
Mm,
where um, all of it is each one of them, of course, is very important, but the confluence is extremely critical as well. And I think the greatest opportunity for us, as a payments ecosystem, is to make sure that while we have these agents and AI come into this payments domain, while we are actually democratizing open finance and data as well, we make sure that the identity of that person is completely secure, right? And the data associated with that identity is also secure. Why? Because open finance makes it easy for people to get access to that data, right? And so you need to have the right security solutions, you need to have the right safeguards,
mm,
fraud solutions on top of that identity, so that you can then have more safe commerce, right? Fundamentally, that's what it is, right?
yeah.
And if we don't have those safeguards, those right security solutions, the identity-based solutions, when in the world of open finance and AI, the trust with commerce will go down, right? And ultimately, people might regress back to using cards, or when I mean by card, when I mean cash, right? Not cards, sorry, cash, right? And so we don't want to go there. We want to actually move forward in that domain, right? And so I think that's where the beautiful challenges and the opportunity lies today.
Okay.
Right.
Just to dive into the opportunity more there, though, what can that mean if we can get that right? If we can What could that mean for, because the biggest open banking success I've seen in the UK so far, unfortunately, is, I say unfortunately, but it's the revenue, the HMRC, yeah, Her Majesty's
Hmm.
Revenue and Customers, who, and it's very clever, it's very simple as well, where they, I think it was last year or the year before, 5 million people used open banking to pay their taxes.
Hmm.
That's pretty good for the economy in many ways. Um, and we need those sort of things. But that scale for me, we've got a population of 60 million people here, and the fact that 5 million people use one single piece of technology to move billions, hopefully, of money. Where do you see opportunities for businesses and consumers within open banking and open finance?
So in open finance, I think, paying your taxes or making payments is just one domain, right? There are a lot of other folks who are actually looking for, especially in the Americas or the US market, folks are looking for access to credit. They're looking for understanding their financial position. They want to do financial management of their own personal finances and so on and so forth, right? So there are other use cases where actually open finance allows for that data to be used.
Mm,
And there is, I would say, ability for those service providers to actually make money, right? Because then they are providing value added services on top of just the data itself. Right. So I think from a payments perspective, I say payments is just one use case. It's a very important use case, but there are other use cases as well,
mm,
right? And if you actually now go into you start, and that's just primarily just the open banking world right now. If you go from open banking to open finance, now you start thinking about the insurance market. I go into open data. There are other types of solutions that you can provide as well. Once you actually expand the notion of just going from financial data to more financial plus other institution based data, right? And so I think uh, payments will always be the first, right? um,
mm.
but then there are other use cases as well on top, where I think the ecosystem is very ripe for different players to come in and provide these services to customers, and of course make money at it as well.
Brilliant. So it seems almost unlimited there, but as we move from open payments to open finance, I suppose from the consumer perspective, access to mortgage data or access to loans and credit is obviously fundamental, but then that also could imply towards savings, investments. That's the whole journey that the finance piece could see. But what about open data as well? Because that opens almost any aspect, surely, of an individual's life that could be open there.
Yeah, you're totally correct, and that's the interesting and the which is the most exciting part of it, right? I think we are slowly graduating. We're graduating from open banking to open finance, and we will eventually graduate from finance to open data. I see them as like a bachelor's, master's, and a PhD, right? We get there, right?
Okay.
But I think we are graduating. We still have to understand open finance appropriately, properly, which will open up a lot of use cases. Just
Mm,
in the banking space itself, we had payments, we had the personal financial management, and then we have like lending and credit, right? All of that stuff, just with the data that we had from open banking. But once we actually start taking a look at open finance, you're right, we're going to have a lot more other use cases, not just these three, but a lot more. And
mm,
then when we actually go into data, I think the possibilities are limitless.
right.
Um, and which is what is exciting, right? The fact that you can get access to that data, and then you provide that data with the right consent to the right service providers with the right security in mind, so that then the consumer or the user gets the service that they want, right? I think that's what is critical. Ultimately, keeping the consumer in mind always, right?
So this is about enhancing not just the customer experience, but actually the possibilities and the choices and better decision making as well. I think
Correct.
particularly in financial space when you've got your own data and there's a power and agency that comes to that. When you say, this is the data I have, I know what criteria you're looking at, but this is the data and this is why I can afford a new home or I can do various other things. But these are the things that impact people's lives and their families. This can have an impact, can't it?
Absolutely, every day, right? I think the more financially educated a family is, I think, in terms of like knowing where they are, allows them to, expand their horizons, expand what they can do. You know, there are a lot of just understanding and knowing about where they are, is very important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to go unoptimistic here now. What do you see as every conference I go to, there's always a conference on, and you've even got conferences on nothing else but fraud now.
Yeah,
And again, it's fascinating for me. I was only talking to a lady the other day talking about identity, and she gave this amazing example in identity where there was a man called Mop Man, because what he used to do is to steal female driving licenses, and rather than to get through the AI, rather than put in a wig on, he'd actually buy a cheap mop and he'd put a mop on his head, right? The mop
interesting.
bottom to try and get through. And of course they linked it and changed it. But these, I suppose the limit of their imagination is obviously unbounded. It's not all about mobs, but it could be about things. So the fraudsters are smart. Okay, anybody who thinks fraudsters are not smart has really missed the gig here. But what do you think? What do you see as the big challenges and how we can try and overcome them?
Um, as the belligerent optimist that I am, I see these challenges as opportunities, right? Um, I think I think fraudsters are smart. I think I'd like to think that we are smarter. And so I think we will come up with the right solutions and the solves and the
Hmm.
and the solutions in place so that we actually thwart them. Um, what I can tell you is that, fraud is definitely top of mind, right? As I mentioned slightly before, we are in this very interesting time when there is this entire group of us like looking to democratize this data for the benefit of the user, and then we are providing that access to all of that very important personal data to the service provider, right? And so you have to start thinking about whether that service provider is secure, whether that service provider has the right SOC guidelines or security guidelines, and so on and so forth, right? I think there are so many different things that we have to do, and we are doing, to make sure that fraud is eliminated, or you cannot always eliminate it, but like is so low, and the threshold for somebody to actually commit fraud is so high in the sense that they have to spend a lot of energy at it, that they will you know try to get just they'll detract from it, right? um, and it's very important for us to tackle that, because if you have fraud in the system, trust goes down in the system. If trust goes down in the system, commerce does not happen, which is what I was telling you earlier too, that people will just be like, oh, nope, I'm not going to use virtual cards. I'm not going to use cards. I'm not going to use, Venmo. I'm not going to use PayPal. I'm not going to use any of these things. Why? Because I just don't understand it and I don't trust it. Right. So I think it is a responsibility that we have, just as being a very important ecosystem player, to actually make sure that we have the right solves from a fraud perspective, from an identity perspective, from a consent perspective, that we have that in the ecosystem, so that we have very good tabs on how folks are using data, how where is the data being used, and just make sure that we secure that data as well. So definitely challenges out there, fraud being top of mind, right? Because now you're talking about people leveraging AI for doing fraud as well. Like it's interesting, it's limitless. So we have to get smarter. But I think of it as a beautiful challenge to overcome, and I'm sure
Okay.
we will.
Yeah. It's funny for me because as well, AI seems to be sort of touted at the moment as not something quite new, but I never forget just a quick story here that I think it's about 20 years ago. And I was
Mm.
in London, and my secretary said to me, she said, your bank have called 3 times. They're dying to speak to you. You need to speak to them. And so the bank said to me, have you been in London all day? And I said, yes. So they said, okay, so you've not been to Paris? No. You've not been to Barcelona? No. And you haven't been to Havana? Okay. And I said, no. And there was a piece. So this is 20
Wouldn't that
years
be
ago.
nice all in one day? Yeah.
Somebody's having a better day than me. Yeah, somebody was having a better day than me because they'd shopped in each one of those areas. Okay,
Interesting.
but the machine to machine work would said in a POS point of sale, it was impossible. It was the Barcelona to Havana. It was impossible from a time travel perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I still just thought, wow, that was incredible. But that was 20 years ago. Where do you think we are with AI now and machine to machine learning, particularly from a an adaptive perspective, to be able to tackle fraud?
So it all goes back to, I think, just general analytics, right? So all fraud analytics or fraud or security solutions, algorithms, if you think about it, and I'm going to go a little bit geeky on you, Adrian, here is all comes down to math, right? When it comes down to math, it's like statistics, and then you have statistics, you have descriptive analytics, and you have descriptive analytics, and it goes into predictive analytics, right? I think we have actually graduated ourselves from being just understanding what's happening into the system to actually predicting what will happen
Okay.
into the system, right? So I think because of all the data that we have now, we have behavior, pattern recognition, we have gotten a lot smarter, right? And I think 20 years ago, we were probably a little bit more heuristic based, right? Like, oh, somebody is in Havana and somebody's in Paris, and how can Adrian have used that card? So it was more heuristic based, but now I think it's a lot more
Right. Okay.
prediction based. It's more a lot more. It's become a lot more smarter, and um, and behavioral analysis and so on and so forth, right? So. Uh,
Mm.
I think as fraudsters have become a little bit more smarter, the solutions have become smarter as well. And I think we are using AI um, a lot more effectively because there are a lot more different algorithms for pattern recognition, a lot more different
Okay.
algorithms for
Okay.
just predicting what might happen, right?
Got it. Okay.
And just and now I would call them anomaly analysis, right? And I think we've become very, very, very smart there. And so uh, uh, what is important is that it's not just being reactive, but being proactive as well. And that's where the prediction actually comes into play, right? I think people previously we were reactive, and you know what? The card networks have become extremely smart at knowing patterns of card usage as well, right? Like they've
Yes,
gotten
indeed.
very, very good at it. I still remember the first time I went to India, I had to tell my bank that I was going to India, right? But now they know that I'm actually going to India. So no, when I swipe my card in India, um, kind of works. But previously it would decline, right?
Yep.
And I think people are beginning to figure out various different dimensions of a person's behavior and then saying, oh, this doesn't look like an anomaly to me. Let's move forward with the authorization, right?
Right.
I think those are the level of depth that I think we have gotten to from an algorithms perspective, from a program perspective, from a product perspective. We just gotten a lot smarter.
Brilliant.
So
Brilliant.
I think we're in a good spot. There's always going to be challenges, but I think we are on a very good foundation of understanding of behavior, understanding of how customers use our products, and then finally how we can now predict how they will use our products as well.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So switching gears now
Mhm.
and coming back to yourself, what messages and what advice would you have for your 21-year-old self? What advice would you have about entering the world there, looking at it sort of after graduate school? What would you be saying to yourself?
Um, I would tell my 21-year self to be. I think at that time I was not belligerently optimistic. I can tell you that. I was still trying to find myself in terms of like what I wanted to do in my career. Um, and I was very fascinated at that time with like astronomy, physics, the confluence of astronomy, physics with computer science, and you know that's why I spent quite a bit of time building the telescopes. Um, but what I would tell, and there were opportunities that I had at that point, and there was this nervousness around me, and nervousness in me as well, to not take those because I didn't understand them. I was like, okay, will I be
Okay.
able to do it or not, right? And what I would tell myself is, be belligerent. If I could go and talk to my younger self, I would tell that person to be more optimistic, not belligerently optimistic, because there is a sense of that comes a little bit later. But I think be more
Mm.
optimistic. Um, um, the other thing I would say, going back to our first first segment of the podcast, right, I spoke to you about the close friend that I had, right, who said, "Hey, Srini, you're not very hardworking, you're not the smartest, but then you are somebody who is always comes up on the top." I would tell my younger self to be a little bit more hardworking. I think I reached at that point. I used to do things very well to 95%, and then the last 5% of like, I have an A already. Why do I need to do the last 5%?
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's what I would tell my younger self. Those two things.
Wow. Wow. So I'm hearing there, is that about bringing a boldness as well and sort of leaning into to what opportunities the world could bring you?
I think so. I think so. I think we didn't talk about this a lot in this podcast, but I think uh, I didn't have a lot of mentors at that time, and I think I missed on that opportunity. Like I know friends at that time who actually had good mentors. I just didn't think that that was very important. I would say it's very important for any young professional to actually have the right mentors, to have the right coaching. Um, and I didn't have it. I think if I had that, things, I don't know, might have been different or might have been the same. But I think that is very important for a young individual, a young professional, to have the right mentors around them.
Mm.
Yeah.
So having the right mentors around you, what impact has that now had on you?
I think clarity. In our day-to-day lives, we tend to have a lot of different things thrown at us from a professional perspective, a personal perspective, relationships perspective, and I think you need a neutral arbiter that helps you to make sense of it because it's very cloudy. Right? It's
Yeah.
very cloudy, and um, uh, you have to have that person who can take a look at all the different variables around you and say what is important and what is not. What is important up in front of you now, and what is going to be important in 2 days, 10 days, and in about a half a year or a year, right? I think that clarity is very important. There are people who are extremely smart and they're able to take a step back away from themselves and all the problems, and they're able to come up with those clarified thoughts, but not all people can do that. Um, I can tell you I can't do that, and so having the right mentors, uh, friends, coaches around you is I would say is very critical for you to be successful in any endeavor that you will, whether that's
Yeah.
professional or personal.
Well, this is the stage where if I can just bring the conversation together and hear some of the summary of some of the great insights that I've taken from that, if that's okay.
Yep.
I think the second part of our podcast, obviously, we've explored more into the industry, but I think the sheer scale of opportunities, I think, was the sort of core message I took this from. But I think when you were talking about almost the accelerating components, we're starting with open banking and what that could mean for people, because like everything does start in payments, but what that can mean and how that can impact different people's lives and give them more choice, particularly when it comes to credit scores and mortgages or loans and those sort of things. But then there's a natural component for that to expand into open finance. And that can open up a whole load of opportunities, not just for individuals, but for businesses and obviously for service providers to provide their products and the data set as well as other value added service. But also then and also the firm belief that about families being able to, the more financially well educated they are, they can raise their horizons. I love the way you sort of provided that optimism for that for a family, because obviously being both strong family men, this is sort of critical what we do to sort of try and have cascading effects for the generations coming next for us. But also, I suppose the wider one of open data and what open data can provide for impacting the whole of somebody's life and the whole of their families, communities, friends, etc.'s lives, I think is obviously a huge cause there. And combined that with the what's AI going to bring to that, what somebody's identity going to bring that, and the security elements, which led us on to talk about fraud. And obviously, I love the way you sort of positioned how the thinking and also the strategies in place are very different. The example I gave was a very time-based one for 20 years ago. But now you're seeing about actually using ultimately behavioral and then using predictive algorithms to say, actually, this is why that's allowed, this is not misaligned with somebody's data set and the patterns. And I suppose this is where AI is really coming in, because I'm hearing there that AI is brilliant at certain things, AI is brilliant at managing huge data sets, being predictive, spotting patterns, and doing tasks. Yep.
Yep.
Where it's combining that with what humans are doing, which is being context makers. Yep. And providing
Right.
that as being the context makers to that. And then I think the final part we brought it together where you talked about your 21-year-old self, where the advice would have been to to embrace and lean into things more, as well as seeing being a bit bolder, as well as then realizing the value of not just mentors on the one hand, but also guide, but also then you taking sort of individually working a bit harder and just I was getting a sense from you there to reach your overall potential. Just what is that potential? If I am here when there's always that gap, or if I go into that, well, perhaps I see something even better beyond there that that could that could take me into my true potential, which is an exciting place, but an uncertain place as well. So they were the key takeaways, along with the fact that, I suppose the thread of our whole conversation is about you bringing a belligerent optimism to each conversation you have and a commitment to take that forward.
As always, Adrian, I think you summarized it extremely well.
Thank you. I wonder if I could leave the closing remarks to you, if there's something you'd like to leave our audience with.
Adrian, this has been a wonderful conversation. I know you and I have known each other for a while. I think so. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I think to voice my thoughts. I think this has been great. Thank you.
Well, can I just take this opportunity to thank you for, I suppose, your warmth, your generosity, and also just sharing your wisdom and also your optimism and your great hard work that you do there in terms of technology space. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Adrian.